Welcome back to Spells from the Shelf. I'm Ammie.
And I'm Paul, and today we have a very special guest on, a great author here, Mr. David B. Coe, author of lots of series. David, let's pass it off and jump in.
All right. Hi. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you guys taking the time to speak with me. I am David B. Coe. I also write as D.B. Jackson. I've been writing now for close to 30 years. And have about 30 novels out and as many short stories. I've written epic fantasy, historical fantasy, urban fantasy, supernatural thriller, media tie-ins, all sorts of stuff. I'm also an editor. I do freelance work, and I also have edited now 7 short story anthologies for Zombies Need Brains and Falstaff Books. Yeah,
and you mentor authors too, don't you? Like, I've read your blog.
Yes, I do. In fact, yes, I have mentored a bunch of authors. I actually got an award last year at Con Carolina as the Polaris Award for being a mentor over the course of my career. So yeah, that's been something I do a lot and enjoy a lot, and yeah.
Amazing. Well, we're really excited to have you here today.
Thank you.
We really are. And Thieftaker, shout out to Polly for introducing me to your novel. I loved it. I love historical fiction. And actually Polly has introduced me to 2 historical fiction writers.
Oh, really?
Yes, Tapestry of Fate is another historical fantasy fiction book where history is woven into it. And I had never explored this before. And for me, as someone who enjoys binge reading, I did love seeing how many novels you have available.
Yeah. For those unfamiliar, the Thieftaker series is a kind of mystery fantasy historical series set in pre-revolutionary Boston, basically the 1760s and forward. My lead character is what's known as a thief-taker, which was basically a private detective who solved crimes in the absence of an established police force back in the day.
Which is so cool. I loved the mystery element too. That was a fun read. And
it was fun to write too.
Imagine, yes.
Yeah.
It was great. I'm up in Boston often for work, and it was really fun reading this, just imagining what pre-revolutionary Boston looks like compared to what Boston looks like now. It was really, we talk about the mud flats, it's like, oh, wow.
Well, but the thing is, you go into central Boston and you find yourself on Commonwealth Avenue or something like that, and you walk past King's Chapel, which is still there, and the Granary Burying Ground, which is what they called graveyards, which is still there. And it's very easy to, if you ignore the cars and the buses and the traffic and the hubbub and everything, it's very easy to find yourself imagining, oh, yeah, I can see where this was the oldest kind of city in this country before it became this huge metropolis with annoyingly good baseball teams and stuff like that.
I do feel like now, after reading your novel, I have to lay eyes on Boston in person at some point. I've yet to do that. I've seen parts of Massachusetts, but not yet Boston. And while we're on the topic of, past and present and the American history, I have a great question for you to start out with. You hold a PhD in American history and you write under 2 names.
Yes.
How did the historian and the fantasist end up collaborating on this particular book?
That's a great question. So I had been writing for a while as David B. Coe, which is my legal name. I got started in 1997. That was when my first book came out. And so I wrote a trilogy and then a 5-book series and then another trilogy, all in epic fantasy, all as David B. Coe. And then I wanted to do something different. I was burnt out on epic fantasy, which is not to say I don't love it, and I've gone back to it since, but I needed a break. All these books were big chihuahua killing, you drop them from shoulder height onto the head of a chihuahua. It's an industry term. And I needed to do something different, and I wanted to try my hand at writing mysteries. And so I came up, and I'll give you more information later. We can talk about it, where the idea for Thieftaker in particular came from. But I wanted to do something with my history PhD, which was in American history. And Tor, who had published the first 11 books, said, well, that sounds great, but everybody knows you as David B. Coe. And when they pick up a David B. Coe novel, they expect epic fantasy. So if you want to do this and you want to make it so different, you're going to need to write it under a different name. And they might have slipped in, oh, by the way, if you do it under a different name, we can pay you X plus 10 instead of X. And I thought, oh, yeah, that sounds, pseudonym sounds like a great idea. And so I started writing as D.B. Jackson for those books. But there really was this sense of, I have a PhD in history. I'd gotten away from history. I left it on my own terms. I wanted to write fantasy. But I always loved the idea of marrying my fantasy geek with my history geek. And the Thieftaker books just gave me this wonderful opportunity to play with history, to go back and explore themes in American history that I had enjoyed as an academic, while also playing with magic and making up stories and saying, hey, let's pretend, and running with something. So it was a lot of fun. I love the Thieftaker books. They mean a lot to me.
Yeah, it was great building on that kind of history riff. So thief taking was a real but obscure kind of historical profession. So what did that research process look like? How much of the job is depicted as grounded in fact versus kind of your own creation and invention?
So everything in the Thieftaker books that is tied to the history is as real and as accurate as I can make it. So for those who are not yet readers of the series, well, my first question would be, why not? But the second thing I'd want to say is, if you're reading about Samuel Adams, my portrayal of Adams is as accurate as I can make it. He was a fascinating figure. He was impoverished. He had palsy, so his hands and his head shook whenever he spoke, and he was a very interesting character, and I tried to make those things as real as possible. But there were no thief takers in Boston. Certainly not in the Revolutionary period. That was entirely made up. And so there's this weird dynamic in my search for realism where I have, there was also no magic in Boston. And there were characters who I introduced who don't exist in real Boston. And so I have all this stuff that's really accurate. And then I'm like, but I'm going to bring thief takers in, and I'm going to make it magic. And so there's this tension. You want to be accurate, but you want to entertain, So it was a lot of fun. Thief takers existed in London. They were in the States actually after we got independence for a very brief period between like 1800 and 1820, while police departments were kind of getting up to snuff in various cities in the absence of British occupation, which had been the source of law enforcement prior to the Revolution. So there developed a need for thief takers in the States, but it was very short-lived. And I'm not at all sure that Boston ever had thief takers. But given Boston at the time, and given what I knew about thief takers from my research, they could have existed in Boston in the period in which I wrote it. It works very well with the chaos that was law enforcement in Boston prior to independence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed. That's a great riff. I almost thought like when you're talking about like marrying the realism aspect, like did you ever like teeter on giving Sam Adams spelling powers? Because I almost thought with the shot where it was like, he's got palsy, but he's a good shot. I almost thought it was coming.
Right. The way I deal with historical fiction is when I add my own characters and world building elements, I can do with those what I want. But I'm borrowing Samuel Adams from every other person who lives in this country.
Right.
I'm borrowing Boston's history from the people of Boston. I don't feel like it's mine to screw around with too much. I feel like it's communally owned, and I need to respect that. And I think part of that is having a PhD in history and having devoted a significant chunk of my young adulthood to pursuing history. I have respect for it, or at least I try to have respect for it. Now, that's not to say there have been times when I had to bend something here and there to make it fit my storyline, but I always tried to do so with as much regard for reality and for that communal sense of ownership as I could.
And I feel like that is definitely felt in the story. I don't get to explore as much history as I did when I was in school. And I feel, and we both noticed it, the amount of genre blending that you have in the book. You know, you have the elements of the mystery aspect. You have the historical fiction aspect, which I do feel like you handled so nicely. And then you added in fantasy, which we both love. Who doesn't love fantasy? But as you said earlier, you know, sometimes you're looking for a fantasy story that has something different in it. So when writing, were you thinking about the structural elements of fantasy versus whodunit, or were you just opening up like the creative can to see what poured out?
A lot of it was the latter. I don't, when I'm writing, whenever I'm writing, with the singular exception of media tie-in, and we can talk about that if you want to. But when you're playing in someone else's sandbox, you need to kind of follow their rules and their processes. But for myself, when I'm writing my own stuff, I like to range as much as I can. I like to give myself, I'll outline a book, but then I like to create in the moment. Some people call it writing organically. Some people call it pantsing. I mean, you can call it whatever you want, but I think all authors exist. There's this age-old debate. Are you a pantser, meaning do you just write off the cuff and let things flow, or are you a plotter? And I don't think it's a binary choice. I think it's something that exists along a continuum. I think we all have elements of pantser and we all have elements of plotting. And so I definitely allow myself to create in the moment. If there was a genre-based structure imposed upon the series, it was probably whodunit. It was probably mystery, because the fantasy elements in the Thieftaker books are actually fairly subtle. I don't have world-threatening master mages who can make Boston disappear with a snap of their fingers or something like that. The magic is far more nuanced and blended into the historical setting than that. And so I was basically trying to write a whodunit with that fantasy element and, of course, the historical setting blended in. Did I answer your question in any way, shape, or form?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That was great. And you also teed up the next question, which is really about kind of the magic system and how it's powered, right? Like Ethan's magic is powered by a cost, either whether it be blood or plant life, and always summons Uncle Reg. So his spectral bridge to magic.
Right.
Tell us why you decided to utilize Uncle Reg as this bridge, and what was your approach to the magical system in the book?
So my approach to the magical system, and this actually gets at, I think, something else you wanted to talk about. I wanted the magic to be as endemic to the period and place in which I was setting the stories as everything else. We were in the 1760s, less than a century removed from the Salem witch trials.
Yeah.
And so I wanted Ethan to be threatened not only by those he was investigating and the murderers he's pursuing and all of that, and he has this rival named Sapphira Price, who I hope we get to talk about because she's my favorite character. But he's also living in constant fear of being hanged as a witch. And so if you look back at contemporary, meaning 17th and 18th century descriptions of what witchcraft was supposed to be, well, they're speaking in tongues. Ethan has to do his spells in Latin. There's blood magic. Ethan cuts himself to get that blood to fuel the spells. And there's communing with ghosts or communing with spirits. Uncle Reg is the spirit. So the three elements of magic that Ethan uses are also three elements of witchcraft that people use to identify witches before, stoning them or hanging them or throwing them in vats of water and seeing if they sunk like very small stones. They work in that way to reinforce my historical setting, and to up the stakes for Ethan should something happen to him.
And it does add in that element, that tension to the plot where, you discover early on that it is a liability for him. And when you were creating this into the plot, were you thinking in the back of your mind as a historian about the Salem witch trials?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wanted having a magic story set in Massachusetts in the colonial period. I think if you ignore witchcraft, you leave yourself open to all sorts of historical criticism and people saying, God, you had this terrific potential story element. Why didn't you use it? And so, yeah, I was very conscious of wanting to bring in everything that I knew about Boston in that period to make Ethan as believable a character and to make the stories as entertaining and as fraught and stressful for my readers as possible, because that's what we do as writers. We try to stress out our readers.
Build the tension, create the conflict, get the hero in trouble all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was a nice, inversion of what you could typically see in fantasy. And then you could see kind of that response you were talking about earlier where you were just like, I'm tired of the epic fantasy genre for now, so I'm going to invert it a little bit and kind of play there. I think the liability aspect to his power, it definitely lent grit and a lot of fun depth to it. So speaking of Ethan and his character, we have an atypical protagonist in Ethan Gale, older, damaged, rather than this young, unmarked hero. So tell me about the choice to start him off older. And how did that allow you to give a different perspective, different lens to his choices that a younger hero might not have allowed?
So this is going to seem like a really weird way to introduce my answer to this, but
yes,
bear with me. Okay. My wife is now retired, but she was a biologist. She taught at the university level. We both have PhDs, mine in history, hers in biology. And right around the time that I started conceptualizing these books, we lived for a year in Australia. And while we were in Australia, she introduced me to one of her scientific colleagues who had made his name as a young man writing about the sexuality of a certain kind of seabird. And that was his research. And we started talking, and I asked him, well, that's fascinating. What are you working on now? And he kind of looked at me and smiled broadly, and he said, well, now I'm writing about the aging of seabirds. And of course, at this point, he was in like his 60s or something. And it occurred to me that I'd do the same thing with my writing, that here I had been writing all these fantasies that had really young protagonists. But by the time I was getting ready to write the Ethan books, when they came out, I was just about to turn 50. And I wasn't interested in young protagonists who had their whole lives ahead of them and really hadn't done anything yet. They struck me at that point as slightly boring. But what fascinated me was someone who had lived and suffered and made mistakes. And it gave him, I think, it made him far more interesting, at least to me as a writer. And I have found in my years that if I'm interested as a writer, chances are my readers are going to be interested as well, because my own fascination with whatever I'm writing about comes through in the text. And so being able to write about a middle-aged man, as someone who had scars, who had dreams that hadn't worked out, who had disappointments, but also triumphs, and it just made him more interesting. And there was one other factor, and that factor was Boston itself. In the 1730s and 1740s, Boston was the leading city in North America. It was bigger than New York. It was more happening than Philadelphia. It was the place to live. By the 1760s, Boston had faded. Its economy had been hurt by the French and Indian War. It was a fading city. And to me, the parallel between Ethan and Boston really worked to reinforce each other. And I was able to play with that idea. I don't know if any of my readers noticed, but I knew I was doing it as I was writing the story and creating these parallels between my threadbare character and the threadbare city in which he lived.
Yeah, you have the Stamp Act, and it's interesting because they were still, like, the British Empire just poking, trying to like squeeze them some more.
Yeah.
No, I feel like it does come through, and as someone who likes to read many different things in the fantasy genre, and Paulie as well, you know, we have read YA fantasies and we read other but it's very rare to get characters over 30. It's extremely rare. And when you find them, I find it the equivalent of like gold. It's like, this is a character, like, as you said, this is a character who has lived and had experiences.
And I don't know if you folks have had time to read, I have a short story collection called Tales of the Thieftaker that's out from Bellarosa. No, it's Lore Seekers Press. And there are a lot of stories in that anthology from when Ethan was young. And so if people want to see him as a young man, they can read Tales of the Thieftaker and find all sorts of stories about him, including the story Ethan spent 13 years, or no, maybe it was, I don't remember now. It's been a while since I wrote one of these books. But he spent years and years as a prisoner on a sugar plantation in Barbados for having committed mutiny on the high seas. The story of that mutiny is in Tales of the Thieftaker.
The Ruby Blade?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And so that story is out there for people to read. But so it was also fun having that kind of source for other tales that I could tell about Ethan, because I have an idea of what his youth looked like, but my readers don't. And so I can go back there and mine this for stories and for more content and stuff. And that's fun for me, and it's fun for the people who have followed the series.
It brings life to them. And speaking of your characters having a lot of life, I want to talk about Price, because she was my favorite. What a great element that you added here, because this is his non-magical nemesis. And immediately, as someone who started out as, when I was a young reader, mystery was all I wanted to read, I immediately thought of Sherlock and Moriarty, where you're like, how is Moriarty such a nemesis? But it works, and Price worked for this. So in a world where magic is supposed to be Ethan's edge, why did you give the protagonist's fiercest rival none of it?
Because she had everything else going for her. She has every other advantage except magic. So let me back up just a little bit. when we were getting ready to go to Australia, my wife and I both were geeks. So before we go someplace, we read about it. We read a book called The Fatal Shore, which is a kind of comprehensive history of the settling of Australia. We wanted to learn about Australian history before we went. In that book, boy, am I exposing myself as a geek now. In that book, there was a discursive footnote that I read, and it launched this entire series. The footnote was about thief takers, because, of course, Australia was formed as a penal colony. And so it was tied into why did they need a penal colony in the 1780s when they hadn't needed one 60 years earlier. Part of the answer is thief takers. There's a thief taker who lived in London named Jonathan Wild. And this is a real person. He was brilliant and daring and the most famous thief taker ever. And he was responsible for many of the crimes that he ended up solving, which was why everybody thought he was such a genius. He would hire people to steal things. He would sell some of it, return the rest, and people thought, oh, he can solve any crime. So I wanted to create a Jonathan Wild type character to be juxtaposed against Ethan, who is not the best of thief takers. He's not as successful, and he suffers by comparison to Sapphira in the eyes of everyone in the city. Just as Jonathan Wild was a hero, she is a hero. Just as Jonathan Wild had henchmen working for him and had reach throughout the city, so does Sapphira. So she has every other advantage. She can hobnob with Boston's most famous, most powerful people. Ethan lives in poverty. Nobody is interested in hobnobbing with him. So magic becomes the balancing factor in their rivalry. Now, I don't know how far you've read in the series. Later in the series, she finds a way to negate that advantage to a certain degree. And I'm not going to say more than that. But they also end up working together a little bit. And actually, I was writing one of the more recent stories, and I finished writing for the day. And I came downstairs. My wife was like, how was writing today? I was like, it was pretty good. I don't know how it happened, but Ethan ended up getting boozy with Sapphira Price because they ended up getting drunk together. It was a really fun scene to write. But she is sharp-witted and mean-spirited, gorgeous beyond compare. She has everything going for her. And so I'm not going to give her magic. Not yet. There's stuff to do there.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it becomes like a team of rivals later on in the series. That's really great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I can't wait to get to that part.
All right. So you've had quite a journey as an author. You mentioned, you first published in 97 with Tor. Thieftaker was published in 2012. Tell us about your perspective and how your views on the publishing industry have changed since when you started to now. I know you've got a blog post on this too, but I feel like you've seen so much in the industry.
Yeah. I probably have 20 blog posts on this. It is a never-ending source of material for my blog. It's a complicated question, but the growth, so we're talking about basically 30 years. We're talking about a 30-year span from about when I started publishing to where we are now. And over the course of that 30 years, we have gone from me being able to say to people, I'm an author, and they're kind of like, okay, and then saying, I have a web page, and then being like, you have a web page? To an industry that is entirely digitized. Mm-hmm. When I started writing, there were no such thing as ebooks. There was no such thing as ebooks. All publishing was paper publishing. Mm-hmm. Everything published was put on a dead tree. And publishing was completely dominated by the big houses. Yes, there were some small presses, but they were nibbling at the edges of the publishing business. Self-publishing was known as vanity publishing because nobody was putting out their own books. It was a sign of disgrace to put out your own book, because it meant that you couldn't get a publishing house interested in it. There was no such thing as self-pubbing. That's also a phrase that just wasn't in the lexicon. Again, it was vanity press. So the changes are seismic between then and now. I think, and I can say this because I'm, well into my career, I'm well established, I'm not, I don't care anymore. The publishing industry has dealt with these changes terribly, because they have been reactive all the way through. They have failed to anticipate every major change that has come to the industry, and instead have been playing catch up with each new development. The people who are leading the way in all of this tend to be the authors themselves, or those small houses that used to be nibbling at the edges, but which are now digging chunks out of the industry, and giving the major publishers ever shrinking parts of the industry to call their own. When I started out, I was what was known as a mid-list author. And basically that's exactly what it sounds like. I wasn't a bestseller. I've never really been a bestseller. My books have done well enough that I've been publishing for 30 years. And I've won awards and I've gotten great reviews, but I've never been Tom Clancy. I've never been Brandon Sanderson. I've never been any of those big names all the way at the top, but I'm also not a newbie anymore. And got out of that very quickly because my first series won a fairly major award. And so I was immediately kind of ensconced in the middle level of publishing. Mid-list authors have gotten squeezed out, so that now you have this bifurcated system where you have lots and lots of young authors trying to get in, and the publishers will give them a shot. And then you have lots of people at the top. But the middle, which is kind of representative of the American economy at large, but the middle is squeezed, and the middle is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so more and more mid-list authors are having to go to those smaller presses because the major houses are not interested in us anymore. And so I used to publish with Tor and Bain, and now I publish with smaller businesses, which I actually love because they treat their writers much better. I don't feel like I'm part of a huge stable anymore. I feel like I have a relationship with my publishers, and I like that. I think when I got into it, there were lots of journals that had magazines where you could see your short stories in print and on sale in a bookstore magazine rack. Most of those are gone. But
they moved to like Substack.
Yes, they have. But what has happened is there are digital marketplaces now for short stories, and actually, I think we're seeing a renaissance of the short story market in lots of genres, but certainly in sci-fi and fantasy, where you're seeing lots of people getting published in short fiction venues and getting paid fairly well for it, at least relative to what we've always, used to be like 2 cents a word and a McMuffin, and now you can make some money as a short story writer because there are all these places, and the stricture on length has also changed. As I was getting into the market, big fat fantasies were the rage, and then the bookstores started saying we want smaller and smaller and smaller books because we can shelve more. Instead of having 3 books this way or facing out, we want to be able to have 6 books because we can sell them and we get the same price for them, and that makes us happier. Length matters less in any publishing ecosystem. And so also what happens is it used to be short stories were strict, 5,000, 6,000, maybe 7,000 words. Now, if you write a 12,000 word short story, people don't really blink at it. It's not really a short story, technically. I think that's either a novelette or a novella. I don't remember which. But whatever, the strictures on length are not as great as they used to be. So that is a very lengthy overview of the changes I've seen, probably more than you wanted to know.
so much to unpack there. You know, first off, there was the short story piece in the Renaissance. It made me think of Omni magazine, right? Like Omni magazine was the sci-fi magazine that pushed out a ton of sci-fi. We saw a ton of authors come out of there. Neuromancer is one of them. But it's great to hear you say that, right? Because you don't always. The short story was like, it's like I could pass on that. I'd rather, the novella's always been around, right? Like the novellas were really popular Victorian era and prior, but and then talk to me about, the piece of the publishing, and I don't know if this perspective is spot on. It's just it's a one-sided observation so far, but it feels like it benefits the publishers to have the author like the big houses to have somebody self-publish, build up the audience themselves, and then do all that work. So it's less on their marketing team. And then it's like, oh, you guys have a big following? Like, yeah, come on board. It almost serves as an easier scout.
Certainly it does. The problem is a lot of self-published work never goes through a serious edit. People who do it well, and there are people out there who do it very, very well and who make a lot of money. There are also people out there who don't make any money doing it, but also do it with a conscientious effort to put out the best book they can and will engage an editor and will go through multiple drafts. But a lot of the self-pubbing industry over the years has been people who get impatient with the process. And the process involves developmental editing, line editing, copy editing, proofing, all these things that we do, going over the manuscript again and again and again. Sometimes I'll read a manuscript 8, 10, 12 times before it finally finds its way to print. Each one of those passes, ostensibly, makes the book better, right? And I think a lot of people who got into self-pubbing were looking for ways to get a shortcut around that cumbersome process. And so, yes, there are people out there who can do really well and churn out these books and have publishers say, hey, I want you on board. But there are also people who do really well whose books the publishers are going to look at and say, that needs work still. And a lot of self-pubbing authors maybe aren't as into getting into traditional publishing because they don't see any need to. They don't want to share their profit margin with a house that would do the same thing that they're doing already on their own. Or some of them, and not all, but some, might also say, I don't want to go through 4 or 5 steps of editing. I'm doing fine putting out the stuff that I put out, which isn't edited. Why would I change?
I do think it's like almost as if a double-edged sword in a way. So I have read many self-published indie authors, and there are some that have, you can tell that they've gone through a very extensive, somewhat editing process. Mm-hmm. I do think that this fast-paced world almost has it as if books are becoming fast food. That fast-paced fiction, pushing an author to, if say they have 3 books lined up, say they want to do a trilogy, pumping it out within less than a year from a previous book, where, in my reading journey, I've always been okay with waiting for a book to come out. I don't want fast-paced fiction if it's not going to be what you want it to be as the author. And I do worry about the pressure that the readers put on authors, whether they're traditionally published or self-published, because I've even seen some trad published work that I felt got pressured to be put out very quickly. And you can tell.
Yep. Yes, absolutely. This is not a problem that's unique to self-publishing. There is that sense that traditional publishing has gone from saying, yeah, David, it's fine if you put out a book a year, we're fine with that pace, to, we'd like to get this trilogy out between, today, July 12th, and Christmas. It's like, what? How do you expect us to do that? And part of the equation is, I'm old school and I'm an old man, and I do things the old way. I write slowly, at least compared to what some people do. And I'm okay with that. As I say, I'm nearing, the end of a very good run. I have stories I still intend to write, but I'm not going to kill myself doing it because it's not worth it. I'm working on a book right now, and I'm writing it at my pace. And when I get it finished, I'll get it finished. But
yeah, I love the idea of just it being iterative and just, like when you're crafting something, whether it be a book or other, it takes time to shape it exactly the way you want it. And each pass, something improves.
Yeah.
Yeah. No one rushed Michelangelo. Well, maybe they did rush Michelangelo. I don't know. But no one rushed him to paint the Sistine Chapel, and it's beautiful. It's gorgeous. So I think of books as art as the same as I think of a painting, as a movie adaptation. It's all art to me.
Right. And so I have a brother who's incredibly talented. He's a visual artist. He paints. And, he works at his pace as well. But there are people out there who are doing all their painting now. And I don't even understand the technology, but they're digital images. And they do striking work, but they can do it at a pace that's very different from what a traditional artist works at. You're right. As you said, I mean, we live in a fast-paced society, and the expectations, as people have gotten used to news being instantaneous and music being downloadable, at a moment's notice, they've come to expect the same thing from art and from their literature. And it's, I don't envy the young writers coming up now who are going to have to produce and stay relevant in that world. I don't think I could have done it. That's the best way to say it.
Yeah, this was I loved this side quest moment. And speaking of you as an author, you mentioned earlier about the two names that you write under. Is it two different ways that you write then? Do you decompartmentalize depending on if you write as David Coe or DB Jackson, and how does it come out?
And let me just add on top of that, like, do you add a third pen name when you want to do a different topic? Like, when does it end?
That's a good question. I gave you the history of it. So part of it was a branding issue originally.
Right.
Since then, so there is a difference in the work I do as the two authors. I haven't really thought about this, but there really is. Generally speaking, the books I've done under D.B. Jackson my books generally have been very well received critically, but my best critical successes have all been D.B. Jackson books. The Thieftaker series did amazingly well. It had all four of the original novels from Tor were named novels, on the best novel of the year list by multiple websites. It was just, the books were really well received. And then I did the Isledale cycle, which is a time travel epic fantasy series, as D.B. Jackson. And they were starred reviews at Publishers Weekly and really nice reviews on all these websites and in journals and stuff. And so that stuff has done well. And the David B. Coe stuff has been more fun. In a way, it's stuff that has more mass appeal, and is a little more, it's the difference between a really good but nutritious meal and a can of Pringles. The David B. Coe stuff has been Pringle-like, and people, they eat them and they love them, and that's great. But yeah, there are some differences among the two. And I have separate websites for each and separate accounts on social media for each. And I think DB is kind of a jerk, but that's just me. So yeah, it's It's been fun to do. I would not want to take on a third persona. I think that would make my brain explode.
Bridge too far.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There has to be an end. All right.
Yeah.
So, as we kind of talked about, we've talked about the pen names, the journey as a
pet names. Is that where you
pen names?
Yeah. I don't want authors having pet names for me. That's not.
But so, what advice? You said you wouldn't want to be one of the young writers coming up just a few moments ago. So, what advice would you give to the writers in our audience, and also share some of your mentoring story, or kind of tell us a little bit about the advice you do give?
So the advice I've given for years now, and it's kind of a three-tiered bit of advice, but the advice is love what you do. And I mean that, as I say, on a couple of levels. One of the levels is kind of meta. Being an author is, except for a very few of us who have huge success, and I say us, I'm not actually one of them, but there are some authors out there who make gobs of money and are famous, and that's great and good for them. Most of us don't ever get that. The vast majority of writers who make a career of this or do this long term, we make a little bit of money. We struggle with staying current with the industry, with doing all the stuff that writers are now expected to do, which, going back to that, how things change, writers are now expected to be their own publicists and to do all the stuff that publicity departments used to do. And if you're going to do that stuff, if you're going to write and you're going to have to deal with the ego bruising and the lack of huge remuneration and the rest, you better love it. You better be writing because you can't not write, because you have stories burning a hole in your chest, aching to be told, and characters clamoring in your mind for attention. So that's one level of do it because you love it. Mm-hmm. The second is don't try to write a story that you think the market will like. Write the story you want to write. Love the story you're trying to tell in any given moment, because the market is a moving target. And even for self-published authors, sometimes you can't get the book out in time to meet the expectations or desires of the market. And so what you have to do is write the story you love, hope that it finds an audience, and get it out there. But if you don't love it, if you're not passionate about the story you're telling, chances are that's going to come through in the writing. I think my readers have liked my work because I love my work, because I'm passionate about it. I love Ethan Cale. I love that time travel epic fantasy series. I love the David B. Coe popcorn stuff, the Justice Fearson series, and the Chalice War books that I just did, which are a Celtic-themed urban fantasy. They were so much fun to write. I love them. And so love it in that way. And then finally, love what you do means look at your work and take pride in the accomplishment, even if it never sells, even if you are not entirely satisfied with the life arc of the finished product and how it's received and everything else. Appreciate your own work, because we can all read through our stuff and find these moments where we go, wow, I did that. I wrote that scene and got these emotions going, and that's pretty cool, because all I had to work with were words and paper. And somehow I brought it all into 3D relief and made it real, and it worked. That's a marvelous feeling. And giving yourself that grace, being able to say to yourself, even if the book isn't a bestseller, even if it didn't get a great review from such and such, I did this thing. And it's really cool that I did this thing.
Yeah, I love that as passion being contagious, right? We know fear is contagious, we know paranoia can be contagious, but passion is too, right? And it comes through in the writing.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things I would say. The other thing I would say to young writers, and it's along the same lines as learn how to self-define your success. We as writers get so much feedback in the form of royalty statements and sales projections and print run information and good reviews and good press and bad press and all of this stuff. And it's all external. And so we are constantly dealing with the whims of a cruel and capricious marketplace. And to the extent that we can say, you know, for this project, I wanted to finish the book. It's the first book I've ever finished. Everything after that is their gravy, but I define success in this project as finishing it. And we do that. And the next one is, I define success in this one as selling it, even if it's to a small house, selling the project. Whatever comes after is gravy, but I did that, and that's a success. Being able to self-define your success makes this a far less hurtful industry.
Huh. Wow. That was powerful.
Buckle up.
Yeah, that was good. Wow. Yeah, no, that gives so much insight into the world. I feel like into the world of writing and publishing that we've seen, but that really kind of shines like a big light on it.
Well, thank you.
I think we should take that lesson to everything we do, right? Yeah. Self-define your success and don't take all the externals, right? Like that's bigger than just what we're talking about here. And I think that really resonates.
Yeah. I went shopping this morning, found the exact oat milk I was looking for. My day's a success, man.
It might all go downhill from here, but this oat milk has brought it.
I'm ready for a nap, but boy.
Well, if you have time for one mini bonus question,
sure.
Do you want to share anything that you're working on currently at this time?
Tell us about this Celtic project too.
Sure. With the Celtic project, all 3 books are out. They came out from Bellbridge Books, and actually Bellbridge Books has folded. And so these are going to be brought out again eventually by Falstaff Books. But they're Celtic mythology in the present day, and the Celtic wars between the Sidhe and the Fomor are happening in our world. And there are 4 chalices, and they're basically the 4 holy objects of the Sidhe, which were the Stone of Fall and I'm going to forget them all right now, the Sword of Nuala and all these. Anyway, they're chalices of magic. If the Fomor, the demons, get them back into the underworld, we lose magic in our world and we can't protect it anymore, and everything's overrun by the demons. So that's the idea of the series. But it has a lot of humor in it. And so my battle mages, the Morrigan, the 3 of them, they're nightclub singers in Vegas when they're not battling, when they're not screwing around with humanity. And the sea god he's a parrot head. He listens to Jimmy Buffett, and he wears sandals and has long hair and stuff. And so there's all this modern humor mixed with a very serious bad shit's going down stuff in the magical realm. And it's so much fun to write. It is so much fun to write. I really enjoyed that. Right now I am working on, I don't like to talk about projects when I'm in the writing stage. I view ideas as like a bottle of soda, and every time you open it up, you lose just a little fizz. And if I talk about it too much, the story goes flat. So, but I'm actually writing a science fiction story, which I've written some science fiction, but never like this. It's basically space opera, which I've never done before. And I'm using an old literary classic as the jump off point for my story. And so I have this weird mix of old time, like 18th century literature mixed with, or maybe 19th century, mixed with space stuff. And that's been fun to do too.
Nice.
That sounds so interesting.
Heard it here.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This was a great conversation. I loved reading your story. You absolutely can tell that you had passion for it. And I definitely felt it through the pages of that first book.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we're in July, right? 250th birthday of America just passed. Like, if you're looking to read something really interesting, this is Thieftaker just brings the Boston history in. It's really a spectacular read, a lot of fun. And if you get really into it, you got lots of books to read and go deep.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you guys so much for having me. I appreciate it. I've been on kind of a hiatus from work for the last few years. We had a tragedy in our family, and I'm still recovering from it. And this is a nice way of getting back into talking about my work and thinking about my work and all of that. So I appreciate the opportunity.
We appreciate you sharing that with us. Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. Spells from the Shelf. Follow David Biko, David Jackson. Follow him, pick him up. He's got lots of stuff coming out, lots of different genres. You can find him on our podcast, all major platforms.
Yes. Bye, everyone.
Have a great day.